Police officers of Reddit, was there a time you wanted to let someone off the hook but couldn't? And if so, what happened? Guy was brought into the station by the German police in handcuffs. I was told to fill out the paperwork and advise the guy of his rights. He'd been busted for DUI. It was New Year's Eve and his neighborhood was having a party. He witnessed a female at the party being harassed and verbally abused by her husband. He tried to intervene but the husband wouldn't back off. All the MPs were tied up. He tried calling a cab and no one was available, and everyone at the party was blitzed. So despite having had a few drinks, he took it upon himself to just drive the woman back to her home. On the other side of the neighborhood, in that very short distance, he got pulled over by the police and arrested. Essentially it was all just a good deed gone wrong. I had to read him his rights, but I also strongly hinted that he waive them and write a statement about the events. He ended up not getting into too much trouble military wise but still had the DUI on his record. I definitely felt bad for the guy. Edit. That's what I get for writing this then going to bed. At the time, I was US military police, stationed in Grafenwohl, Germany. The soldier in question was living in an off-post housing area, in which the Germans and the US both have jurisdiction. The police were conducting random stops, as they have the right to do so. Since it was New Year's, since the soldier was compliant and not stumbling around acting like a fool, he was not charged on the German side of things. They simply brought him to the MP station and let us handle it. The DUI remained on his record but he was not demoted or barred or anything, since he could prove that he'd exhausted all options before choosing to drive. Edit 2. He wanted to write a statement about it long before he waived his rights. Even after being advised he kept talking and told his story. Everything he was saying would have gone in my report anyways. So higher ups suggested it would probably just be in his best interest to write out the full story, instead of getting it piecemeal in my paperwork. He was clear and articulate, with no outward signs of being intoxicated. They didn't walk to the woman's home because it was a housing development. Her house was on the other side, a good mile walk or so. It was the 31st of December Jan 1. Very late early and freezing cold. The MPs were tied up and a cab couldn't get to them for another 1-2 hours. The woman didn't drive because she'd had far more to drink than the soldier had. I'm not sure what came of her husband. Obligatory not a cop comment. I'm sorry, but I am a criminal defense attorney and I have to be vague about this. Because privilege. I had a client who charged with public intox, but this person was not drunk, just off their meds and manic. I watched all the body cam footage. 5 cops responded, and all but one wanted to book my client in on more serious charges. The one who didn't straight up said I am not comfortable taking this person to jail. They need to go to the hospital. A supervisor was called in and overruled him, telling all the cops there to book client in on 3 serious charges, one of which was a felony. The one cop recognized the situation for what it was and literally took my client out of another cop's car and booked them into jail like he was told, but booked them in on public intox because he knew it was the most minor offense he possibly could, and his report made it very clear what he thought about the whole thing, which made my end and dealing with the DAWII easier. I respect the hell out of him. My partner is a police officer in Australia. One day he pulled over a guy on a motorbike with a young child, 7ish, sitting between him and the handlebars with no helmet on. The guy explained that in India where he'd just moved from that was a perfectly normal thing to do, and my partner explained that in Australia it was a big no-no. The guy started getting hostile and disrespectful, demanding that he be let go without a ticket and allowed to continue back home with the kid still on the bike. There were a lot of witnesses in that, coupled with the guy's attitude and disregard for our laws, prompted my partner to give him a ticket, even though he initially just wanted to give him a warning as he was so new to our country. He also had to chauffeur the kid back to his house. Hours later, my partner gets a job to go to a domestic violence incident. He recognizes that it's at the same address he dropped the kid off at. He tears their code 2 and is confronted by the same Indian guy who slashed his wrists and is bleeding out everywhere. The guy ends up not dying and had to spend a stint at psych ward. Turns out that when he got home, his wife had given him a massive tongue lashing. saying he'd brought shame upon them and the sight of their son being dropped off by a police car with all the neighbors watching was utterly humiliating. She said she was going to leave him and go back to India etc. And the guy tried to end it all as he was so overcome with self-remorse. Sad all round. Crazy how a small traffic ticket that wasn't even going to be written out at the start blew up into life-changing events for this family. Edit. Oh wow. Thanks for the gold, mate. I'm actually pretty chuffed as I've never received it before. I got a ticket one day by turning left. I didn't see the no left turn sign because all the construction crap. The next day I accidentally cut off the sheriff. Not an officer in the department, but the bloody big guy himself. What's worse, I didn't have my license and registration. I was a teen and a mess, so I handed him the ticket from the day before as proof of license and insurance. With a big unapologetic grin. Dude laughed so hard he had to hold on to my car. Didn't give me a ticket. I still wave hi to him when I see him. Chill dude. Body cameras have changed how we operate. Big time. I love them and record far more than policy dictates, but they do diminish our ability to make decisions based on circumstances. For instance, a couple weeks ago I handled a simple shoplifter. He was homeless and genuinely seemed like a decent guy stealing things he needed to survive. However, the entire encounter was on body camera. How can I justify not taking one shoplifter to jail, then turning around and taking the next? How do I know their personal circumstances? Make no mistake that attorneys are requesting our body camera footage for everything we do. The fear of finding discrepancies in how we handle situations is real. There are less breaks given now, and if you give one, it better be consistent to everyone who violates the same law. In the end, I still prefer to record everything and will take that loss of discretion over getting sued. Edit. Thank you all for the kind words and excellent discussion. Also for the gold. I just started my 12 hours shift, so I'm having trouble keeping up with comments. Trying to do so between calls. Plenty of times, but one in particular stands out. Me and my partner respond to a call of a domestic incident. Female caller states her husband threw her into the dresser and broke the bathroom door. So we get there, and as we are walking up the driveway, this woman comes screaming out wearing only shorts. No shirt, no bra. Anyway, we prepare for the worst, figuring he was gonna follow her, coming after her, while we keep her outside for a min. When it's clear he wasn't coming out, we go inside with her. By this time another car arrives with 2 more cops. So we go inside and she sits on the couch and covers herself with a blanket. We notice she has a nice bump on her head and elbow. She says her husband just got home after completing 2 tours in Iraq. Just got home 2 hours ago. She picked him up from the airport. He gets home, takes, and first thing he does is take a shower. She said, I have no idea what happened. He got out of the shower, grabbed me and threw me at the dresser where I hit my head and elbow. Then I came downstairs and called you guys. So we go upstairs and find the guy sitting on the bed, with his head and his hands crying. He look up at us and says, I'm so ducking sorry, I didn't mean to do it. Without being prompted, he tells his story. She picked me up from the airport and drove home. I come inside and jump in the shower. When I get out, I knock over the garbage can in the bathroom and it falls over. He went to pick it up and saw inside it was filled to the brim with used condoms, like a box worth. And he was right. The garbage can was filled with condoms that obviously weren't his. He said he came out and confronted her about, to which she just shrugged her shoulders and said, oh well, you weren't here. So he grabbed her and pushed her away from him in frustration. She hit the dresser and fell to the floor, running out of the room. He gets frustrated and punches the bathroom door, putting a hole in it. Well, we had no choice. We had to arrest him, charge him with assault third. I'm not condoning what the guy did, but I understand it. He was off fighting in a war for 2 tours while his girlfriend was living in his house, driving his car, having sex with other men in his bed. The real kicker. When someone gets arrested, there's automatically an order of protection granted. In nice DV cases anyway. The order stated he had to vacate his home. He had no friends, no family, and had to live in a shelter for a number of weeks. Bumped into the guy a year or so later. No job, no money, alcohol and drug problems. All stemming from this one incident with his girlfriend. I have more if you guys want to hear, and have a few heartwarming stories as well. Let me know. Edit. Whoa, okay, so I wrote this then went to work. We'll try and get back you guys. I'll also leave a funny story to try and balance this out. And thanks for the gold. Edit 2. Okay, so people have been asking how they can help this man. Unfortunately this happened over 12 years ago in the Bronx. I hope he did get his life together eventually. Edit 3. Okay Dart, so it seems I need to explain a few things regarding discretion and why I couldn't simply sweep this under the rug. In NICE, if two people live together and certain offenses occur, they fall under family offenses and they are must arrest situations. This means I have zero discretion. Police have to arrest in these situations, even if the complainant, son, daughter, wife, girlfriend, baby mama, anything that falls under family member doesn't want the person arrested. In these cases the state would become the complainant. This was done about 25 years ago to combat the problem of husbands beating the it out of their wives and the wives not wanting to press charges and he kills her. The police used to have discretion in these cases. Hence the what does he have to kill her for you to arrest her. Edit 4. The funny story I promised you guys. So we get a call of a rescue. A little boy with a training potty stuck on his head. So we go to the apartment and the mother tells us her son is sitting on the couch inside. We go inside and there is a 3-year-old sitting on the couch watching cartoons, drinking a Capri Sun with a training toilet bowl seat around his neck. It was stuck around his neck for over 3 hours at this point. His mother tells us that he put it over his head while fooling around and now she can't get it off. It won't come past his ears. It seems there is an inward dip in the toilet seat that allowed him to slide over his head in one direction but can't get it up past his ears in the other direction. So there we are, my partner and myself sitting on either side of this young man while he sits there sipping on his juice pouch. We try and raise it a little bit and it gets caught on his ears and he screams like we were stabbing him. At this point the fire department shows up. So now there are about 6 people in this house all looking at this little kid with tears streaming down his face. Poor guy. FD was hesitant to use any sort of tools because of how close the seat was to his head and neck and the fact that he wasn't exactly sitting still. So we ask the mom if she has any butter or Crisco in the fridge that we can use to lubricate the seat and hopefully slide it up past his ears. Well, she says she doesn't have any butter, but she has something in her room that may help. She goes into her room and returns with a half-full tube of anal EZ. Yes, this poor mother handed me her 6 lubricant in full view of 2 cops and 5 or so firemen, and she didn't seem to be embarrassed in the least bit. Anyway, we put on our gloves and began to slather anal EZ all over the seat and this kid's face, neck and ears. A 3-year-old boy whose face is covered in his mom's anal lube jelly. Well, after some turning and careful lifting, the seat popped right off with only minimal scratches to his ears. We all cheered, returned the mother's tube of lube and left the house. Just after high school, I had just showed up to a party in the woods. No sooner had I grabbed a beer than about 5 cop cars come flying in, lights blaring. Keep in mind, I haven't drank a thing, but my mind went run. As I start running down this path, a cop starts following me in his car. Fat guy, wasn't very fast. I realize I'm not getting away and stop running. He comes up to me laughing and says good choice, big boy, and cuffs me and sits me down back up at the fire. I proceed to tell him everything and he laughs and gives me a breathalyzer. Once he knows I wasn't bulleting him, he just says okay, have a good night, best cop ever. Edit, forgot to mention, a few years later my wife and I were visiting my parents in the same town, and he pulled me over for speeding. He walks up to the window, looks in and laughs, slow down big boy, then drives away. Nice try, internal affairs. I'm not a police officer, but I was an urban park ranger in NIC for 5 years. Most of our job was environmental education, but we did some law enforcement, mostly at the end of the fiscal year when the parks department would hand out overtime to run out the budget. So anyways, we were kicking kids out of the park at night. They were getting drunk and acting itty, so we were trying to end the problems before they got bigger. So there was this doofy kid that we saw hide something in a planting. I got out of the truck to approach him and he took off. I chased him, caught him, and handcuffed him. We put him in the back of the truck while my partner looked for what we thought was a bag of weed. For the record, had he not run from me, we probably would have just sent him home. But we were out there to do a job and we needed to show results. So I'm in the truck with this jerk off and he starts losing it. telling me there's nothing to find and he didn't hide anything. Meanwhile, my partner can't find anything. I can see that this kid wasn't one of the cool kids, because I was never one of the cool kids, and he's been acting like an idiot to fit in. But I have to do my job here. So I start trying to calm him down, asking him a bunch of dumb questions, which he fumbles through. Finally I ask him, is my sergeant at least looking under the right tree? No, it's the other tree. So what's he looking for? There's a blank stare on his face. Duck. So I tell my partner to check under the other tree. He finds a single bottle of twisted tea. I uncuff the kid. Get the duck out of my truck and go home, you ducking jerk off. My dad used to tell us that if he ever pulled someone over and they said, what can I say? You got me, he'd let them go. This was probably also depending on the offense. I assume. Nobody ever said it. He'd tell stories of people who'd say, what can I say? And he'd be waiting for the next part, but it never came. So he didn't let them go because they didn't say it fully. Edit. I've had a few people ask if this is a reference to anything. As far as I'm aware, it's not. I asked his best mate just now, who knew his obscure references. It was just his own little thing, not a reference. Edit 2. More people have suggested Breaking Bad. Dad never watched it and he'd resigned from the job in 1999, long before the show came out. Not a cop, but when I was 17, some friends did a scavenger hunt. My GF and I bowed out early, because it ended up being a tie. The tiebreaker was defined as bring back the coolest thing you can. One of the teams heads over to a shopping plaza, where there was a mechanical horse ride. With just a couple of bolts, they take this horse off the mechanical ride mechanism and put it in the backseat of a 1986 Chevy Nova. They get 5-10 feet, when the cops that had been watching them the entire time light them up and have them pull over. One of the back windows didn't go down, so the head of this horse stuck out about a foot from the opposite window. My friend, she starts crying. Her girlfriend is crying. The random girl we never saw again because she was getting a ride home is now crying. And the one dude is freaking out. Cops are super serious. They make them all step out of the car, give them a bit of grief, then make them put the horse back together again. They have to make sure it works. So one of them has to ride it. My friend, because she was the driver, now has to ride a mechanical horse. Still crying. Cops ended up writing her up for a seatbelt ticket and they went on with the night. Probably laughing their ass off. Probably made their week. I live in a small town in North Texas. While I was 8.5 months pregnant last spring, I was speeding on an open stretch of highway to get to the nearest gas station so I didn't piss my pants. All 12 flipped on his lights and I considered my options. I pulled over. Like, right the duck over. This little baby-faced officer approaches my window and says, "Morning, mom. Know why I pulled you over?" To which I said, "'Cause I'm hauling ass. I totally deserve this ticket and will even say so in court if you, for the love of God, just follow me to the next exit so I can pee in a toilet and not in this seat." Seeing my obviously pregnant belly, he stammered, "Yes, mom." Right away. He did just that, only in front of me, with his lights going. He even changed the lights to green. He waited until I finished just to ask if he could help me with anything else. He said he wouldn't be giving me a ticket that day as his wife had a 3-day-old baby at home and he'd broken many a speed limits to get her to a toilet. I bawled and sent him an edible arrangement and a thank you card for going above and beyond his call of duty. My parents have always told me this story, so it may or may not be embellished. In the middle of night when my mom went into labor with me, my dad pulled up to a 4-way intersection, waiting to take a left at a red light. This was back in 1989, so who knows if sensors existed, but for whatever reason, the light wasn't turning. My dad had gotten sick of my mom screaming at him to just go, so he did. As he took the left, a cop pulled out behind him and tried pulling him over. My mom apparently wouldn't let my dad pull over, so the cop followed them into the hospital parking lot. My parents and the officer each got out of their vehicles. No words were exchanged. The cop just stood there and watched my parents walk up and into the hospital. I guess he left a note on the vehicle saying congrats. Just had to be sure or something like that. I've always been told I had a police escort to the hospital the night the I was born. I worked third shift for a city police dept. Had turned around at the city limits when I clocked a vehicle traveling 80 plus mph coming towards me. I hit the lights and turned on it, since I was leaving the city to catch him, and actually figured this was going to be a pursuit. It was policy to advise dispatch what was going on. So grab the mic, badge number. Dispatch, I just turned on a vehicle traveling 85 eastbound out of the city. Stop the car, and it's a soldier. Still in BDUs that had just got back from Iraq or Afghanistan. I can't remember that day and was headed home to see his family. Did not want to write the ticket. Told him I didn't want to write the ticket. Since I'd said that on the radio though, I had to write it. Told him to come to court, and I do what I could to get it dismissed. Talked to the judge, and at traffic court judge dismissed his ticket and thanked him for his service. Felt about 3 inches tall writing that dang ticket. Yeah. A few years ago I responded to a domestic incident between a lifelong family friend and his wife who knew my family before I was even born. Talk about awkward. Being directly in the middle of a personal argument of people that watched me grow up from the moment I was born. Ultimately the male half had pushed the female during the argument and was arrested. He admitted to it and whatnot, so there was no question it occurred. I have no tolerance for domestic abuse, and arresting for domestic abuse is one part of the job that makes me feel like I'm actually making a difference, if not just for one person that shift. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel bad while processing the arrest. This guy otherwise was a saint and helped my family out a ton in more ways than one. But what can ya do? It was awkward. I don't feel like I did the wrong thing at all. But I just sort of wish the guy was able to control his temper so I didn't have to deal with that. Found a couple homeless teenagers in a park after dark, which is illegal in my area. They had bicycles and a trailer with them. One of them lied about his name because he had a warrant and I arrested him when I figured out who he was. The second was chill the whole time. Didn't lie and wasn't a problem. I was going to cut him loose. My sergeant shows up and notices that the park has some graffiti on the tables and accuses the chill kid of doing it. The graffiti wasn't wet. The kid said he didn't do it, but he still had art materials in his bag. Some markers and a sketchbook. The sergeant made me take the markers and book as evidence. The kid says, "Dude, that is my only art outlet and the only thing that makes me happy right now." Sergeant didn't care. I had to follow orders. Sometimes the job just sucks. Friend is a cop. Went to a shoplifting call and the guy was homeless. Said he needed some new underwear and was already wearing it as he put it on in the change room, and he was hiding under a car. He was forced to take off the underwear, and mind you my friend said it was filthy, so the store was forced to just throw it away. My friend felt bad for the homeless guy but had to take him in anyhow. An old roommate was a police officer and once she had a shopkeeper detain a shoplifter. When she got there it was a young kid, 11 or 12, stealing a carton of eggs and a couple boxes of cereal. He looked totally malnourished and unwashed. She eventually got it out of him that he didn't have food at home. She called social services, of course, but she asked the shopkeeper to just let the kid go so he could deal with CPS without this added stress or a spot on an otherwise clean record. The shopkeeper insisted, wouldn't let up. She didn't know what happened to the kid after that, but didn't think it could be anything good. Was in court on 9/11 for a possession charge. First plane hit. Stunned. Right as I was called, the second plane hit the second tower. Judge looked at me and said, "Kid, bigger things are going on in the world today. Do not take them to home. Take a cab." Was a crazy day. Here. One time I arrested a girl for DUI around 8 or 9 in the morning. She put her car into a ditch. After I placed her under arrest, I found out that the reason she decided to drive drunk was to get away from a house party where she may have been sexually assaulted, raped. Why she didn't call someone to pick her up, I don't know. Maybe she felt like had to leave right away. I processed her for DUI and released her to her mother. I encouraged the mother to take her to the hospital and file a report with the sheriff's office. Happened in the county. Not sure what legally happened to her. It would have been up to the prosecutor to reduce drop charges for the DUI. An officer commented on how he wanted to let someone off the hook with a warning for a traffic violation, but because of body cameras he had to treat them equally and tow their vehicle. Had a family friend who was in charge of watching over a school. Long story short, he wanted to let someone off the hook cause the kid was being physically threatened to do weed. And even though the kid's life was on the line, they had a knife. He had to cuff the kid cause it was the legal punishment at the time. When my best mate and me were 17, we were walking home through a dodgy part of town one night after a party. We sat down leaning on one side of a store. On the other side of the store across the parking lot there was a car idling and some guys standing around it. Whatever, we will leave them alone. Sitting down for about 5 minutes when one of the guys from across the lot ran around the corner and yelled cops. I'm not sure why we ran, but we did, and we got to the end of the car park before the police stopped us. We still have no idea why we ran. We had nothing to hide. I think it was just because it happened so fast. So one officer talks to us and we tell him we don't know that guy and we made a mistake. I showed him my Catholic school ID card because it was the only ID I had. He was a nice guy about it and even laughed that we could be so naive and just run. We told the truth and the cop told us to take our alcohol back and just get home safe. The other guy lied and they took his alcohol and he was pissed. Saw him about a month later randomly and he remembered me. He told me all cops are Ds. That's probably true if you lie to them, lol. My uncle is a university campus cop. Super friendly, goofy, funny guy. When I think of him I think of rambunctious card games, cliff jumping, and him pinning me down to fart on me. As such, he got the nickname Officer Friendly. One time he caught a student smoking a joint on campus and as per his job asked him to hand it over. He expected the guy to hand over the joint, but the guy just started walking. My uncle followed the guy not knowing what was up. The guy kept walking to the university residence, inside, and up to his room. He handed over 2 ounces of weed. Here, an ounce or more is considered trafficking. My uncle wasn't even planning to write this kid up. Just wanted him to stop smoking, obviously in the middle of campus, but at that about had to bust him for a trafficking level amount. I got a call once to a Burger King and it was an anonymous tip that someone they had a warrant. Ran the info given by the caller and confirmed the warrant. Arrived at the Burger King and found the guy. Talked to him and asked if he knew he had a warrant. She said he didn't think he did. Normally I'd be like, yeah sure, okay dude, but this guy was super nice and literally only been at Burger King for like 5 minutes on his lunch break. The warrant wound up being a 3 or 4 year old probation warrant, but because it was still active I had to take him to jail. I felt really bad about doing it to him since he was genuinely taking steps in the right direction to turn his life around and still wound up going to jail. I had pulled a man over for speeding. Nothing major, just about 9 over. He was super cool, very apologetic, just a nice guy in general. However, as I was writing his warning, I spotted a small baggie laying on the passenger side floorboard with what appeared to be sugar in it. Can't let that one go. Sorry man. Wish you could have hid it a little better. Edit. I didn't mention this fact. I had a body cam on. Pretty critical to the story. Domestic incident. Husband and husband argue. One husband grabbed the other husband by the balls for whatever reason. Husband who did the grabbing admitted it. Husband who was assaulted wanted other husband to leave the house for a few hours. Welp. Couldn't by law, I had to make arrest. This thread is already so old and I know this is going to get buried, but I have to share this story anyways. Years ago I took a law enforcement class and was told this story by the officer. It took place around 2 in the morning or whatever. Right before this officer was supposed to get off of his shift, he pulls this lady over. Obvious DUI. Obvious. He grabs her license and stuff and she literally lies like a block over. It's late. He doesn't really want to deal with the paperwork and says, look, I will just give you a ticket if you can get someone to take you and your car home. Lady was not having it. She said she had no one. There was no one who could take her. He continued asking, pleading, feeling almost bad for this poor woman who he described as an emotional wreck, but she didn't budge. She said she was divorced, knew none of her neighbors, and her 18-year-old son had literally died the night before, and that's why she was drinking herself into oblivion. The officer was stumped. He had no idea what to do. He couldn't book this lady. He told her one moment and started heading back to his car. He looked behind him to see her pull something from her bag. He ran back to her as she slit her throat with a little knife she had in her bag. He said luckily it wasn't a bad cut and he was able to stop the bleeding while he waited for the ambulance to arrive. Apparently that lady called him a few weeks later and had apologized and said she could never repay him for saving her life that night.